Hello, cloud gurus. We've seen how easy it is to deploy applications in Kubernetes. Now it's time to talk about how to monitor your applications. And I can tell you it's easy to do in just a few commands. The first one that you've probably already seen, that is kubectl get pod or get pods. If we go to the command line, and again, we'll type kubectl get pods, and we see that we have 3 pods running there. Their status is running. We can see how long they've been up. We can see the name of each pod and how many containers inside those pods are ready. And you can actually abbreviate kubectl get pods in as little as get po or po. And there you go. You get the same result. And by the way, one of my favorite things to do is to create an alias. So you can create an alias for kubectl and just say that k equals kubectl. And now I can type k get po. And that way, in as little as 6 characters, I can get the status of my pods. Of course, if you wanted to go even further with an alias, you could do something like kp equals kubectl get pods. And now type kp, and there we go. And by the way, if you type kubectl get pods -h, and here you can see the full command line options for kubectl get. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is -o for output equals wide. And you actually have to spell it out there instead of just W. And that gives us additional information. You can see here the IP of these pods. You can see the node that the pods are running on and more. If we scroll up and look more at the help information here, of course, there's a lot you can do with kubectl get, but one of the cool things is kubectl API resources. And this will give you a complete list of all the resources that are available from the Kube API, and that's actually everything that you can get. So let's try it real quick here before we go back and talk about some other ways to monitor our applications. So I'll type kubectl API-resources, and this is a complete list of all the things that you can get. Probably more information than you need to know right now, but it's good to know that the Kubernetes API is really just an open book. You can get anything you want out of it, and there's a lot of flexibility on how you can display it. Another way to monitor your applications is to run kubectl get deployments. So we'll type kubectl get deployments, and that gives us a list of our deployments. You can see the status of those deployments, if they're up to date, if they're available, how long they've been running. And you can also use -o wide here and get additional information. The name of the images, the selectors, which are the labels that are applied to these deployments, and the names of the containers that are running inside. And you can actually abbreviate kubectl get deployments all the way down to kubectl get deploy. And of course, if you wanted to create an alias for it, you could do something like alias kd equals kubectl get deployments. So we've got kd for get deployments and kp for get pods. That's cool. Another important command to know when it comes to monitoring your applications is describe. You can describe your pods and you can describe your deployments. Let's give that a try. So let's clear the screen and type kubectl describe pods. And here we get information on every pod, which you can imagine on a cluster that had many pods, you'd get a lot of output here. So why don't we just describe a specific pod? For example, let's select this web server right here. We'll take the name of the web server, clear the screen, and we'll type kubectl describe pod, a specific pod, and the name of the pod. We'll just paste that in. Now we just get information on that specific pod. So if we start at the top, let's look at what we get. We get, of course, the name of the pod, which we just provided, the namespace that the pod is running in, the node that the pod is running on, when it was started, any labels that are associated with the pod. And we haven't talked about labels yet, but labels are a great way to identify your pods. We get the status of the pod, the IP address of the pod, what it's controlled by. In this case, it's controlled by a replica set, and that replica set is controlled by a deployment. We get the container ID, we get the image name that's used in the pod, any ports that are open, when it was last started, the reason it was last terminated, any mount points for data, conditions, volumes, secrets, and then finally any events that are associated with the pod. And describe is a very powerful command because, as we said, you can do not only kubectl describe pods, but also kubectl describe deployments. And so I just specified all deployments at that point. If we scroll up a little bit here, let's look at one of these deployments. So this is the WordPress MySQL deployment. You can see any associated labels here, the status of all replicas, the containers that are running inside, the ports that are configured, environmental variables that might be set, mount points, volumes, and any events associated with this deployment. So you get a ton of good info there. kubectl describe is a very powerful command, and of course it makes us wonder, what else can you describe? Well, if we just type kubectl describe, it tells us we have to specify the resource that we want to describe. And we can find that list of resources by doing kubectl API-resources. And that's something we already did. You saw the very long list of resources that are supported by the Kubernetes API. And really, we can use describe to describe any of those resources. For example, we can describe services. We can describe persistent volume claims and much more. Again, anything that's supported by the Kubernetes API, pretty much you can describe. And then the last method of monitoring your applications that I want to point out is the ability to view logs, kubectl logs, and then the name of the pod. Let's give that a try as well. Let's clear the screen and type kubectl. Let's just try logs. And it tells us that it's expecting either a pod or a type/name. So if we type kubectl get pods, or remember our alias KP, we get the pod names there. Now let's type kubectl logs, and then we need to specify the name of a pod. And so we can easily copy the name of a pod, paste it in there, and if there are logs, we get logs for that pod. In this case, there weren't any logs, so let's try it on a different pod. Let's try this WordPress pod here. And there we go. That one has some logs available to us. If we scroll up, you can see here these are actually logs from WordPress. WordPress was copied. There were some failures here related to MySQL. It recommends us to set the DNS name and some information here from Apache as well. And logs are a great way to troubleshoot when services aren't coming up that you expect to be up and available inside a container, which of course is inside a pod. So those are some great commands that you need to know how to perform when it comes to monitoring your applications running in Kubernetes. We've got a lot more to cover. I'll see you in the next lesson.